In the summer of 1893, Newport, Rhode Island, glittered like the crown jewel of America's Gilded Age. Mansions rose like palaces along the cliffs, their marble columns catching the golden light of dawn, while orchestras played into the night behind tall French doors. The air was thick with the scent of rose gardens and old money, and in the middle of it all was Evelyn Hartley, the belle of Newport. She was just 19, but her name alone carried weight in society columns from Boston to New York. The daughter of textile tycoon Walter Hartley, Evelyn had grown up in Hartley Haven, a sprawling Gothic Revival mansion with 62 rooms, hand-painted ceilings, and imported Venetian glass. Her father's mills employed thousands. Her mother, once a London debutante, hosted garden parties where senators sipped brandy and barons brokered deals beneath rose-draped trellises. Evelyn had everything, at least from the outside. She wore pearls before she turned 10, spoke fluent French by 12, and by 16 had already come out at a debutante ball attended by the Astors and Vanderbilts. She rode side saddle in the mornings, played the piano at noon, and changed gowns thrice: daily morning dress, luncheon attire, and evening silks. Portraits of her hung in the grand stairwell, always with a soft smile, as if painted to project perfection. But perfection was her prison. What no one saw behind the layers of lace and the polite curtsies was a young woman slowly losing herself in the expectations of others. Evelyn was trained, not raised. Groomed, not guided. Her days were scripted like a theater production. Every smile had a purpose. Every gesture had weight. Even her friendships were approved, her letters read, her outings supervised, her suitors pre-selected with financial and political motives in mind. Her life wasn't hers, it belonged to her name. Inside Hartley Haven, the windows were tall, the mirrors taller, but the girl within them felt small. The chandeliers may have sparkled with 1,000 crystals, but Evelyn's soul dimmed with each passing day. She began keeping a secret journal, hidden behind the loose panel in her bedroom's oak bookshelf, the only place she felt truly free. In it, she didn't write of gowns and gossip. She wrote of longing for a world she had only read about in books. Today they measured my waist again. 21 inches, the seamstress smiled. But it's not just my body they're trying to shrink, it's my spirit. I dream of a life where my name means nothing and my heart means everything. She wasn't ungrateful. Evelyn knew she lived better than 99% of Americans, and that guilt haunted her more than anything. She would sneak away from charity luncheons, hosted by her mother, to follow the staff outside to see the kitchen workers and maids. To listen, to understand, and what she saw disturbed her. Children the same age as her siblings barefoot in alleyways, women scrubbing floors with raw hands, men sleeping in wagons outside factories. Her family's mills produced millions, but she never once saw a loom. She began to wonder what was the cost of all this beauty whose backs had built her world, but when she asked questions, she was silenced. "It's unladylike to concern yourself with politics," her mother warned. "You are not a Hartley to work. You are a Hartley to wed." Her father reminded her, eyeing a young railroad heir with ambition in his heart and greed in his handshake. Evelyn smiled at the parties. She danced at the galas. She posed for the newspapers, but inside something was breaking. A quiet defiance grew. She no longer saw her mansion as home, but as a gilded cage. The velvet walls suffocated her, the chandeliers mocked her. The mirrors reflected someone she didn't recognize, and so, behind that perfect smile was a girl plotting escape, not from danger, but from comfort. Not from poverty, but from the expectations of privilege. She didn't want to rebel, she wanted to reclaim her soul. That summer, as the waves crashed below Newport's cliffs and the city prepared for another season of opulence, Evelyn Hartley stood at a crossroads, one path leading to a life of diamonds and duty, the other to mystery and freedom. She chose silence, she chose courage, she chose herself, and within a month, she vanished. The parlor of Hartley Haven had gone silent. It was the morning of August 5, 1893, and the sun rose over Newport as it always had, golden and serene. But the house felt hollow, servants whispered in corners, her mother hadn't left her room, and her father's boots echoed like thunder in the hall. Evelyn Hartley was gone. They searched the gardens first, thinking she'd slipped out for air. Then the cliff walk, the winding coastal path she loved, the one that curved behind the family's mansion like a ribbon draped in stone. The maid recalled Evelyn had said the night before, "I need to hear the ocean by myself." All they found was her ivory parasol, still open but dry, oddly untouched by dew or sea spray. A storm of rumors exploded. Had she fallen into the rocks, fled with a secret lover, gone mad? But no one spoke aloud what many feared. Had the pressure finally broken her? It wasn't until weeks later, while changing the linens in Evelyn's private dressing room, that her handmaid Martha noticed a loose wooden panel behind the armoire. Curious, she removed it and gasped. Inside was a leather-bound book, old and worn but heavy with use. Its pages were inked in long, slanted cursive. It was not addressed to anyone. There was no salutation, no intent of delivery. But it spoke to the soul like a cry from a cage. It was Evelyn's secret diary, and within its pages lay a story no one in Newport was prepared for. "They praise me for my manners and call me elegant, but I feel like I'm dying slowly behind silks and chandeliers. They dress me in perfection and say, 'This is your role, your honor, your fate.' But I was not born to be a decorative bird in a locked cage." Entry dated May 4, 1893 from the first page. It was clear. Evelyn had been living two lives, one for the world, the other for herself. She wrote of her loneliness, not the kind cured by company, but the kind that deepens when surrounded by people who never truly see you. She poured out her frustrations, her moral agony at the wealth she lived in while people in town begged for bread. She wrote about watching her father smile during church sermons on humility, only to dismiss his workers' pleas for fair wages. But more than anything, Evelyn's diary was filled with questions, deep, aching ones. Why was I born into gold while others are born into ash? What makes my comfort justifiable? What good is this life if it serves no one but itself? She often wrote late into the night, by candlelight. The handwriting shifted, neat when calm, jagged when anxious. Her entries spoke of a hunger that wealth could never feed, a hunger for truth, for meaning, for freedom. And there, toward the final pages, was one line underlined twice in red ink. "I do not wish to be envied. I wish to be useful." Then came an entry that chilled the spine of anyone who read it, dated just 3 days before her disappearance. "I have watched the ocean for days. It calls to me not to die, but to change, to be made clean. I believe God speaks not always with thunder, but with quiet courage. Tomorrow I will walk the cliff walk as Evelyn Hartley one last time. After that, I will walk this world under a new name, for a new purpose, not to shame my family, but to save myself." The diary ended abruptly. There was no farewell. No apology, no hint of destination. Just a final phrase scrawled across the back cover in barely legible ink. "A bird is meant to fly, not sing in cages." Her parents never released the diary to the public. To them, it was scandalous, a mark of rebellion. But to Martha, the handmaid who discovered it, it was something else entirely, a manifesto, a declaration, a girl's final cry for her soul. Years later, when rumors surfaced that Evelyn may have resurfaced under another identity, it was this diary that gave them weight. Every entry was a breadcrumb, a map leading not to a grave, but to a rebirth. Evelyn didn't vanish to escape life. She vanished to start living it on her own terms, with her own name, beyond chandeliers and curtsies. She didn't leave behind a note. She left behind something far greater, her truth. It was a humid, overcast morning on August 4th, 1893, when Evelyn Hartley stepped out of the grand entrance of Hartley Haven. She wore a pale blue walking dress with white gloves, a sun hat tilted elegantly over her eyes, and carried her signature ivory parasol. To any observer, it looked like a routine stroll, the daily ritual of the heiress who often wandered the cliff walk to admire the ocean's rhythm and reflect in silence. But this walk would be different. It would be the last time anyone in Newport saw Evelyn Hartley. Her mother, preparing the drawing room for guests, thought nothing of her absence. Her father, reviewing ledgers in the West Study, assumed she'd return by luncheon. The maid who saw her depart recalled Evelyn saying, "I won't be long, just need a moment of stillness." That moment would stretch into hours, then days, and then forever. The search begins by late afternoon. Panic had replaced politeness. Servants combed the gardens and courtyards, calling her name. The cliff walk, a winding, scenic path carved into the cliffs behind Newport's stately mansions, became the epicenter of a frantic search. It was a place Evelyn loved, often claiming it made her feel smaller in a comforting way. As if the sea understood her loneliness, they found her parasol, open and untouched, lying near the edge of a cliff overlooking a jagged outcrop below. It was strange, too carefully placed to have been dropped in distress. No torn fabric, no broken ribs, no evidence of a fall. There were no footprints leading to the edge, no signs of a slip or struggle, no blood or torn lace caught on the brush. Only absence. A presence removed so thoroughly that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Her father ordered an exhaustive search. Divers sent into the cold Atlantic, dogs brought in from Boston, telegrams dispatched to every train station and nearby city. Nothing. The town reacts. Newport exploded with speculation. The town's elite whispered behind silk fans and behind closed doors. She was seen arguing with her father days before. Perhaps she ran off with that tutor who was dismissed so suddenly last spring. Could she have gone mad? Her aunt on her mother's side spent her final years in an asylum. The newspapers ran wild. The New York Herald dubbed her the vanishing heiress. Illustrations of Evelyn's delicate features, her porcelain skin, her solemn eyes graced every headline. Some believed she drowned, swept into the sea after a misstep. Others insisted it was staged, that she had escaped a life she didn't choose, slipping into anonymity under a new name. A few hinted at foul play, though no evidence ever surfaced. The official story was silence. The Hartley family held a closed memorial service weeks later, attended by the Newport elite, but no body was ever found. What was left behind, what truly unsettled those who loved Evelyn and those who watched her from a distance, was how intentional her vanishing felt. There was no chaos, no final scream, no torn goodbye. Just the faint smell of lavender on her scarf, the quiet elegance of an open parasol, and the haunting emptiness of a path that should have led back home but didn't. It was almost as if she had stepped between the pages of her life and written herself into a new chapter, one where no one could find her and no one could define her. When her diary was later discovered, months after the search had ended, it changed everything. It was not the diary of a girl ready to die, but of a woman desperate to live beyond ballrooms and expectations, beyond her last name, beyond the Hartley empire. She had written, "They will think I drowned, they will imagine I was lost, but I have only now been found by the part of me I was never allowed to meet, the girl beneath the gowns, beneath the name, beneath the performance, a vanishing or a rebirth." The idea that Evelyn had staged her disappearance wasn't just plausible, it began to feel inevitable. She was intelligent, observant, resourceful. She had access to money, knowledge of the schedules of servants and guards, and a determination carved not from rebellion, but from yearning. She hadn't run from her family, she had run toward herself, and that is what makes her story more than just a mystery, it makes it a message. In an era where women were seen as delicate ornaments, Evelyn vanished not in fear, but in courage. She disappeared not to be forgotten, but to begin again on her own terms. And though the world labeled her as missing, perhaps she was finally exactly where she was meant to be. 20 years had passed. The world had changed, wars were brewing, cities rising, and the glitter of the Gilded Age had faded into the smoke of factories and the cracks of growing inequality. Yet in a quiet corner of Chicago, in a school for orphaned girls nestled between soot-covered buildings, a package arrived that would reopen one of the most haunting mysteries of the 19th century. It was a plain parcel, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. No return address, no name, just a label that read, "For the ones who still wonder." Inside, there was no explanation, just revelation. A hidden identity. The package contained a bundle of letters, each neatly tied with blue ribbon. They were yellowed with age but well preserved, written in that same long, slanted cursive familiar to anyone who had read Evelyn Hartley's secret diary. The letters were signed only with initials, E.H. Beneath them lay a stack of bearer bonds totaling over $10,000, a small fortune at the time, and a handwritten note, "This is not a donation. It is a repayment for what I was given when I had nothing but a name I could no longer bear." The letters were addressed to no one, yet each read like a confession, and in those pages, Evelyn Hartley, or what remained of her, came back to life. Her new life. Evelyn hadn't died on the cliffs of Newport. She hadn't drowned in sorrow or run off with a scandalous lover. She had rebuilt herself. The letters revealed that, with help from a trusted housemaid, she had slipped away from the Hartley estate by switching clothes with a servant, catching a train under the alias Helen Marston. With nothing but a small pouch of jewelry she sold in Boston, she had begun a new life from nothing. She first worked as a cleaner in a parish kitchen, then as a teacher's aide in a Quaker school. Eventually, she became a tutor, a writer, and most importantly, a mentor to girls who had no one to believe in them. Her words revealed the evolution of a woman who once lived in castles but now lived in crowded tenements, not in disgrace, but in deliberate grace. "I used to sleep in a bed carved from Italian walnut. Now I share a cot with 3 others, and yet I have never rested more peacefully." The quiet work of a former heiress over 2 decades, Evelyn, or Helen, as she came to be known, founded 3 homes for destitute women, using money she quietly transferred from hidden accounts she'd opened years prior. She created a vocational school where girls learned practical skills: sewing, writing, nursing, accounting, not to marry well but to stand on their own feet. In one letter, dated June 1912, she wrote, "What good is freedom if it is not shared? I escaped not just my family name, but the cage that name built for every girl born with or without fortune. I have made it my mission that no girl in my care will have to trade her voice for a velvet gown." Those who knew Helen Marston in Chicago described her as quiet, intelligent, oddly refined, with a warmth that made you feel you mattered even when you didn't matter to anyone else. No one ever suspected she had once been the most sought-after heiress in Newport. She never bragged, she never claimed credit, she never wrote a book or gave an interview. She simply did the work in the shadows by candlelight and with unwavering purpose. Rewriting the ending, the letters included maps, sketches of her first schoolhouse, and copies of lesson plans she had written by hand. But it was one final letter, sealed in its own envelope, that carried the deepest weight. "To the world that mourned the girl I used to be, do not grieve me. I was never truly born until I was free to serve, and I was never truly seen until I stood among the forgotten, not above them. If you must remember me, let it not be as a vanished heiress, but as a woman who walked away from everything, to become someone worth remembering." The package was turned over to local authorities. The bonds were accepted by the orphanage anonymously and used to build a new wing, the Hartley Hall for independent girls. None of the girls who passed through it knew who Evelyn really was, and she preferred it that way. Because she didn't need her name back, she had finally found herself. A life rewritten in walking away from her inheritance. Evelyn didn't lose herself, she uncovered her truest form. In a world obsessed with prestige and lineage, she chose legacy instead, not one built from marble and silver, but from kindness and courage. She may have disappeared from the pages of newspapers, but her letters made their way into the lives of hundreds. She vanished from high society so she could write a life worth living. In every generation, there are people whose names fill headlines, the ones celebrated for their wealth, beauty, or fame. And then there are others, quieter souls, who leave an even greater impact without ever being seen. Evelyn Hartley, once the belle of Newport, had become one of those hidden architects of change, a woman whose life was forgotten by the world, and yet somehow redefined it. By 1919, the name Evelyn Hartley had become a whisper of the past, a ghost of a scandalous mystery long replaced by new socialites and fresher drama. But the name Helen Marston, the identity Evelyn had taken after vanishing, was deeply respected in the poor districts of Chicago. No one connected the two, not the orphans who called her Miss Helen, not the women she coached through job interviews, not even the newspaper that ran her obituary when she died of pneumonia at the age of 45. It reads simply, Helen Marston, educator and founder of 3 women's homes, dies peacefully in her sleep. She leaves behind no known family, but hundreds of grateful hearts. What the world didn't know, and what only came to light through her letters discovered posthumously, was that Evelyn Hartley had become the kind of woman her younger self had only dreamed of becoming. The legacy she built, she had no statues built in her honor, no trust funds bearing her name, but Evelyn's true legacy was living and breathing in the lives she touched. At the Marston Home for Working Girls, over 200 young women had learned to read, write, and work not just to survive, but to thrive. At the Starlight School, girls orphaned by fire, poverty, and war had learned that their stories mattered, and that they were not invisible. Miss Helen, as she was known to them, taught more than grammar and sewing. She taught dignity. She taught how to walk into a room without apologizing for being in it, how to stand tall, even when the world tried to bend you into silence. One of her students years later recalled, she didn't teach us to chase husbands, she taught us to chase purpose. She said we were born to carry more than teacups. It was a quiet revolution, one heart, one mind at a time. A different kind of power. Evelyn had once stood on balconies, waving to crowds. She had worn diamonds that cost more than most homes, but she found that true power wasn't in being admired, it was in being useful. She had tasted the hollowness of applause and exchanged it for the fulfillment of service. In her letters, she often reflected on the contrast between the two worlds. In Newport, they measured me by my posture and my pearls. Here, they measure me by how much light I leave in someone's day. I choose the latter. She lived simply in a small apartment above one of the schools she founded. She wore cotton, not silk. She walked, not rode, and yet no ball, no banquet, no inheritance ever brought her the peace she felt when watching one of her girls read a book cover to cover for the first time. She didn't need to be remembered. She needed to make a difference. The curtain finally drawn when the truth finally emerged through the bundle of letters and bonds mailed anonymously to her old school. Evelyn's story spread like wildfire among historians and educators. Some were shocked, others skeptical, but those who read her words, who followed her handwriting from the cliffs of Newport to the alleys of Chicago, knew this was not a woman who disappeared. This was a woman who evolved. She didn't abandon wealth. She outgrew it. She didn't run from her name. She simply refused to be defined by it. And though she'd once been raised in a world that told her women were to be adorned, protected, and displayed, she'd chosen to become a force invisible perhaps, but undeniable. What we inherit. Evelyn Hartley's story is not just a mystery solved. It's a mirror. A reminder that the truest legacy is not in what we leave behind in bank accounts or buildings, but in the quiet courage to live a life aligned with what we believe. She was the woman behind the curtain, never on the stage, never needing the spotlight, yet orchestrating lives changed by her hands, her voice, and her choice to live with purpose. So many dream of a life of luxury. Evelyn dreamed of a life of meaning, and in choosing the latter, she didn't just rewrite her destiny, she rewrote what it means to truly live. When Evelyn Hartley vanished from Newport in 1893, the world saw it as a scandal, a tragedy, a mystery too strange to explain. She was the daughter of one of America's wealthiest industrialists, the shining star of the Gilded Age, young, beautiful, and promised to a future paved in gold. Her disappearance left a ripple across society, like a glass of champagne tipped in the middle of a ballroom, shocking, sudden, and utterly unexplained. But her vanishing wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't madness. It wasn't cowardice. It was a message, and if the world had listened carefully, not to the gossip, but to the silence she left behind, it would have heard what she was trying to say. You own nothing if you don't own yourself. The illusion of having it all. Evelyn Hartley was born into a life most people could only dream of. Her gowns were stitched in Paris. Her name was printed in the society columns. Her future was mapped with precision: marriage to a wealthy heir, a life of social hosting, charity luncheons, and perfect children raised by nannies. But inside that dream was a girl screaming for air. In her secret diary, Evelyn once wrote, "They say I have everything, but when I look in the mirror, I see a stranger in pearls. How can I own anything, not the house, the gowns, the respect, if I don't even own my thoughts, my voice, my time?" She was treated like a porcelain doll, admired, preserved, protected, but never truly known, and worst of all, she was not free. Her time, her identity, her very breath belonged to a system built on appearances and obedience. It was then that Evelyn realized a terrible truth. A life can be beautiful on the outside, and still feel like a prison on the inside. So she did the unthinkable. She let it all go and walked away. The freedom no one could give her. Society had given Evelyn everything but herself, and so she reclaimed it the only way she could, by disappearing. She changed her name. She gave up her title, her status, her inheritance, not because she hated her life, but because she knew it wasn't hers to begin with. It had been assigned to her like a costume. What Evelyn did was radical, not because she vanished, but because she dared to ask a question that still haunts people today. If you lost everything that made people admire you, who would you be? For most, that question is terrifying. But Evelyn found it liberating. She discovered that freedom doesn't come from wealth, comfort, or luxury. It comes from the ability to choose your own direction, to be owned by no one, and to live by your own convictions, even if it costs you everything. A quiet revolution. Evelyn didn't lead a march. She didn't write a manifesto. She didn't seek revenge or justice. Her rebellion was quiet and personal, and perhaps that's what made it so powerful. She became a schoolteacher, a builder of shelters, a guide to girls who had never been told they mattered, and in doing so, she rewrote what it means to matter. She wasn't famous, but she was faithful to her calling. She wasn't adored, but she was needed by the forgotten. She wasn't rich anymore, but she was finally whole. In leaving behind her life of luxury, Evelyn proved something timeless. Freedom is the ultimate wealth. Not financial freedom, but spiritual, emotional, mental independence. When you own yourself, your time, your voice, your beliefs, you become untouchable in a way no amount of money can buy. What we must learn from her disappearance, Evelyn's story, isn't just a historical mystery. It's a mirror. So many today live for the expectations of others, dressing the part, posting the highlight reel, chasing applause, clinging to security. And yet, deep down, many feel what Evelyn once felt, trapped in a life that looks good but doesn't feel true. Her disappearance teaches us something urgent. You can gain the world and still lose yourself. But if you find yourself, truly find yourself, you need nothing else to live a meaningful life. Evelyn owned mansions and titles, but she didn't feel alive until she owned her choices. She gave up everything to be herself, and in doing so, she gave the world a far more powerful gift than wealth or beauty. She gave us an example of what it means to live on your own terms. Final reflection. So, the next time you wonder if you have enough money, success, admiration, ask yourself instead, do I own myself? Can I walk away from what doesn't align with my soul? Do I know who I am without the applause? Evelyn Hartley disappeared to answer those questions, not to escape, but to arrive at a life worth living. Evelyn Hartley's disappearance in Newport, 1893, left more than just a blank space in society columns. It left a question that would echo through generations. Why would a woman born into power, wealth, and beauty vanish without a trace? To the outside world, Evelyn had it all: marble halls, diamond tiaras, handwritten invitations to the most exclusive events in the Gilded Age. But what they didn't see was that her world was built on conditions. She could have everything, as long as she obey tradition, obey reputation, obey the silent rules that dictated what a woman could and couldn't do. And so, Evelyn made a choice few dared to consider. She walked away from it all, not because she lost everything, but because she realized she never truly owned any of it. Behind the gilded cage, born into the Hartley family fortune, Evelyn was trained for perfection. Her days were filled with etiquette lessons, corsets laced tight, and smiles practiced in front of mirrors. She was the diamond of her season, polished, admired, and envied, but that perfection came with a price. In her private diary, discovered years later, Evelyn had written, "I dine at tables where I am never heard. I dance with men who never ask what I think. I live in rooms I did not choose, under rules I did not write. Tell me what part of this life is mine." Evelyn's identity had been constructed by others, her parents' ambitions, society's expectations, and the gilded narrative of what a woman should be. She was a possession, a showpiece, and even with all the world's treasures around her, she felt like a stranger to herself. That's when the real question began haunting her. If I don't own my time, my choices, my mind, do I own anything at all? Freedom in Disappearance. On a fog-drenched morning in August 1893, Evelyn Hartley vanished. No farewell note, no luggage taken, no trail left behind, just silence and speculation. Newspapers blamed madness, some whispered scandal, others assumed abduction, but they were all wrong. Evelyn wasn't taken. She left on purpose, in control, without permission, because for the first time she had decided to do something entirely for herself. She wasn't running from responsibility, she was running toward authenticity. Toward the version of herself that had long been buried beneath silk gowns and polite nods. Toward freedom. You own nothing if you don't own yourself. Evelyn's story challenges the core of what we believe success looks like. She had everything money could buy, yet none of it belonged to her in spirit. She was a guest in her own life, a voice that had been muted before it ever spoke. In the years following her disappearance, letters surfaced. Not signed Evelyn Hartley, but rather under a new name sent to an old friend. She wrote, "I have less now, no wealth, no dresses, no suitors, but I wake up with peace. I go to sleep with no mask. I am finally mine." In those few lines, Evelyn delivered the message the world needed to hear. True ownership begins with self. You can live in a mansion and still be homeless in your soul. You can wear the finest gowns and still be shackled by silence. You can be praised by the world and still feel unseen by yourself. Until you own your truth, your time, your choices, you own nothing. Her disappearance wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. After she disappeared, Evelyn was never found. But the legacy she left behind was more profound than any estate she could have inherited. She became a myth, a cautionary tale, but also a symbol of rebellion wrapped in grace, a quiet revolution. Evelyn's story is not about vanishing, it's about reclaiming. Not about losing status but gaining self, not about shame but about boldness in silence. She didn't vanish to escape life, she vanished to finally leave it. The takeaway for us today, in today's world, we are told to chase more money, more titles, more likes, more approval. But Evelyn's story cuts through that noise. If what you chase owns you, you will never be free. Evelyn reminds us that peace is found not in possessions but in self-possession. That if you cannot speak your truth, choose your path, or define your worth, then no matter what you have, you are still a prisoner. So ask yourself, do you own your day? Do you own your voice? Do you own your life? Because you own nothing if you don't first own yourself. In a world that chased appearances, Evelyn vanished not to escape life, but to finally live it. And in doing so, she became unforgettable, not for what she owned, but for what she gave away.